Dzień dobry, dzień dobry. Hello. I'm not so sure if everyone can see us because I cannot see ourselves. But I hope everything works well. So, hello, my name is Roxana Obuchowska. I am a member of the board of Polish Public Relations Association, and I have a great pleasure today to introduce to you Anisu, our colleague from the association, who is going to tell you a few words about engagement of our people and how to do it actually. Anisu is a great expert, and I am so happy that we are able to have him today. It is also the first webinar we have in English in Poland, so actually I am pretty excited, and it's in collaboration with Global Alliance of Public Relations and Communication. So actually it's a fantastic thing. So thank you for joining us. Anisu, stage is yours. In case of any questions, guys, just ask us questions via chat window. We will try to answer them, and also this is recorded so you can watch it later. The floor is yours, Anisu. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Roxana. Appreciate the kind introduction. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you've logged in from. Let me begin by first thanking the Polish PR Association and the Global Alliance for PR and Communication Management for organizing this Communication Month, which is a great platform for sharing knowledge and helping everyone get better with communications. So let me begin by sharing that the central question which I'm going to address is, we traditionally view employees as an audience. But what if we viewed them differently as a partner rather than an audience? So that's really what I will be talking about. And as we go through, I will be sharing a lot of insights, and I want to make it as interactive. So please feel free to post your questions on the chat window, and Roxana will be kind enough to share it with me because I can't see the chat window from my screen. All right, so I've divided this webinar into 3 parts. So the first part is about context setting. So what are some of the trends shaping the world that we live in, and what's really the next normal, what's happening, what will happen, and what is the momentum that's changing what we do and how we do in terms of communications and also HR in a lot of contexts. And last but not least, I will also share some case studies and some approaches and a model which you can put to practice when you're thinking about your particular organization or any other situation or scenario that you have in mind. So here's some context. So there is an interesting note put up on the page website, and this really is about the 7 principles of how we should be, guiding our actions and behaviors. And what it calls out, and I highlighted in red, is that every employee, active or retired, is involved with public relations. And it is the responsibility of the communications team to advocate for the respect, diversity, and inclusion in the workforce, and to support every employee's abilities, capabilities to be an honest, knowledgeable ambassador. Now, this is profound because while we know it, we don't seem to appreciate it enough. And so understanding that the character of an organization is really expressed by employees and staff is very, very important and valuable for us. We've also heard of this research by Edelman, and it clearly says that trust is no more with the CEOs. So employees are trusted more than the CEOs, which means there's a fundamental shift in who people go to for information, who people look to for credible, honest, valuable inputs. Now that means that it's not that leaders are no more, valid, but there needs to be a different way in which leaders need to be presented, and likewise, how can employees be better engaged? There is, again, research from LinkedIn which says that sharing of employee information, so when employees share, there is a significantly large impact that it makes on the overall engagement that a company sees. And what's fascinating is that just 3% of employees sharing content can make a 30% increase in the overall engagement. Now that's significant. Again, we expect that employees are sharing, and sometimes employees do share, but we may not be even aware of what they're sharing. So there is an opportunity, there is also a risk, and so we just need to be conscious of this particular trend that's taking place. Like I mentioned earlier, the expectation was that the brand was always owned by the brand manager, and therefore no one else had a say in it. But the world has moved on, and brands are no more just the property of the company, but it's also the property of shareholders, customers, employees. And when employees are put into the mix, it really changes the dynamics of how we see a particular brand. There is also an interesting book on internal communications, and what it talks about is that co-workers are our most important communication professionals. Now, knowing all of this, how much are we leveraging employees to be our partners rather than being an audience for us? Now, why are employees important? Of course, there's a whole lot of communication apart from what is managed by the corporate comms team. Employees communicate with each other, they communicate beyond the organization. There are, the internal, external communication is also blurring in a lot of ways. So there is a huge impetus to kind of look at employees as core of how we communicate. But what I also want to call out is that things aren't looking very rosy inside organizations. So if you look at the study by Gallup, it says that 3 in 10 employees strongly agree that their employees, their opinions count at the workplace. Now, that is not a good sign. That tells that there is not much of trust, nor is there a lot of effort to find out how employees think or what do they value. Now, this is something we need to really explore deeply to understand why this happens. And very interestingly is that a lot of times employees are expected to conform with what the organization wants them to do. So even if they want to be themselves, organization culture makes them become like everyone else. And that doesn't help, because then they are not being themselves, and therefore they're not freely expressing who they are and how they would like to be at work. So there's again a very interesting dynamic at the workplace. And like I said, trust is eroding between employees, so the employees and employers. So the contract, the work contract, which is traditionally there, is no more the same. So employers don't trust employees as much, because of course there have been cases of data theft and store theft and all of that. And on the other hand, as we've seen, employees also don't seem to believe that employers trust them as much. So there is research that also says that collaboration inside the organization is very limited, and there is obviously an opportunity for us, and there is a need for us to make sure that employees are given the right resources, platforms, guidance, and an environment where they are trusted to collaborate even more and better. This interesting study talks about where do employees get engaged, and what's fascinating from this particular research is that the part where employees are expected to be involved the most is the most inadequate. So when it comes to problem solving, very few employees are involved. But when it comes to staff meetings and briefings, all that happens because leaders are communicating one way. So there is a need to think about how can we involve and engage employees more and in a fruitful manner. And the study across companies which have good communication teams and the best communicators in the world also are not involving employees enough. So when I say they're not involving employees, what do I mean by that? I mean that every time we create a communication, there is always an expectation that the communicator knows best, or the leaders knows best, but that's not really true. We also need to step back and be a bit humble and involve employees by asking them and taking their feedback. So if there is an advisory group where you pre-test communication, there's a greater chance that you can catch a lot of the mistakes or catch a lot of the issues that happen downstream. And again, I just thought I'll put a slide also about the employment issues which are happening in Europe, especially, and because right now I'm in Europe, and this is highly contextual to the European scenario. The change in the employment and the workforce is also evolving. So a lot of the full-time employment is decreasing. There's a lot more non-standard work happening, and therefore people are a bit there is a lot of precariousness in how the employment is viewed in this part of the world. So I'll pause here on the first part. So I want you to kind of reflect as an employee, as a communicator, as a leader, as a HR leader. What are some of the challenges that you observe based on these trends? What are some of the opportunities? So, based on what you heard, what you've seen on the slides, based on some of the trends, what is it that you would think differently or do differently or go back to your workplace and ask different questions? So that's something I would ask you to reflect on. And if you have any questions, feel free to post it on the chat window and I can pick it up uh, at some point. With that, I'll move to the next part, which is talking about the next novel, which is the barriers and opportunities to lead in the future. Now, when we look at employee involvement, again, research talks about there are different types of engagement. So you have involvement and enthusiasm of employees at the workplace, and that's really what engagement is about. But then there's also the psychological, motivational, and social aspects. And if employees feel good, then they are the greater chances of them to participate and be part of the organization. So in the past, the focus was a lot on my paycheck, my boss, my annual reviews, everything was about the particular person. But now it's ongoing engagement, looking at what the purpose of the organization, trying to align. And there is a shift towards employee experience, which is goes beyond engagement. So this is about every single aspect of the employee journey and how is it being consistently improved and enhanced by the organization. So this is really the path which we should be on if we want to involve employees. And there is employees also want to do work their way, which means that they need freedom, they want autonomy, they would like to even if it's bringing their own devices to the workplace, that is something which they prefer. So there are expectations that they have, and we need to be mindful of what is on the minds of employees. So in the past, the focus of organizations and of course communication teams were let's inform. It's a very passive way of engaging. It's quite reactive. There is an issue, then we react to it. But now the focus should be a lot more on involvement, participation, and sense making. And so how do you help employees to make sense of what's happening? There are so many changes. The dynamics are changing almost every day at the workplace, and how can we help them feel more comfortable, more understanding of what's happening, and therefore take them along the journey. And therefore, the shift should be towards more autonomous work groups, team working, and all of that, compared to just having newsletters go out or just doing some briefings or doing surveys, which was how the traditional way of engagement was. The future is also about co-creating stories. So it's no more that the communication team is responsible for getting the stories, putting it together, publishing it. That doesn't really work because it's very labor intensive. So the future is about creating stories and co-creating them content with your employees, and that's where employees can become your partners rather than just being an audience. We are also seeing a shift where there's a lot more internal crowdsourcing which is happening compared to a lot more outsourcing. So in the future, what you will see and what we are seeing is that a lot of the answers are within the organization, and therefore giving empowerment to employees helps to make sure that they are aligned and they are empowered to kind of go out there and make those ideas work for the organization rather than go outside and get those ideas in the open market. Now, there has been recently some controversy about moonlighting by employees, and again, these are some of the challenges and risks that organizations need to balance this entire concept with. What's crucial is to give employees choice so that they feel more engaged. So that's again research which has come out. So employees who have been given choice are more engaged, and that is proven by this industry research. Likewise, when organizations realize that employees can be themselves, that's when they are able to operate at their best. They are most productive and they feel better. It improves their well-being, and there's a whole lot of interesting dynamics which impact them and impacts the organization overall. So again, I'll pause at this part. So some reflections, some questions which I'll pose to you is how do you feel as an employee or a leader or an owner of a business when it comes to your level of partnership inside the organization. So is it strong? Is it moderate? Is it weak? So how is it that you're sensing it? Do you feel the vibes from your employees that they are expecting a lot more engagement? Are they expecting a lot more ownership? Do you see any other issues playing out in the workplace related to these dynamics? So I would, keep this in mind when you think about involving employees. Okay, with that, I'll move on to the third part. And I know I'm going a bit fast, but I wanted to also keep time towards the end so that you can ask questions and we can make it a bit more interactive. So in this section, what I want to cover is, again, some leading trends and then get into some cases and approaches. And finally, I'll leave you with a grid or a model which you can put to practice. So let me, this particular slide is interesting. There's a McKinsey study which talks about purpose, and what they have discovered is that purpose inside an organization, it's and how employees are engaging with it. Now, if you see the diagram on the left-hand side, they talk about purpose from organizations, purpose from work, and purpose beyond work. Now, when employees see their relationships at the workplace, they see it from these three levels. But what is interesting is that the organization can only control the one in the middle, which is the purpose from the organization, and that is about corporate culture, about purpose, is about employee experience. So that is all they can control. But what employees can do more is during work, they interact, they find meaning. There is employee activism that they can do, and beyond work, of course, there is volunteering and all of other activities, well-being and things which they would like to do. So that's how they find their purpose. Now, uh, what has come out from the study is that there is a big gap between how leaders see purpose and how their staff or their reporting managers and frontline workers see engagement and purpose. And this particular gap is quite stark, because it seems like the executives and the upper management agree that they are living their purpose on an everyday basis, but on the other hand, it's just 18% of staff who believe that they're getting as much purpose from the work that they're doing. So this is something for leaders and HR managers to ponder about, because this will mean how you rewire and restructure the work that you're doing, plus, of course, how you communicate back to your staff. And on the other hand, there is studies which say that if employees are given an opportunity to share their voice, and it really makes a significant impact on their perception that the employer is supportive. So it increases their overall positive employee experience. It improves their engagement. And what's interesting is that when they are asked for their ideas and suggestions, they feel better. When they are given the freedom to do the work in the way they want to do, that's when they feel more engaged. So employee voice is very crucial in this entire exercise and journey. And communicating with staff is much more healthier than communicating to, because then it's not seen that you are communicating to an audience, but you're communicating along with your staff. And from this particular study, from Meta, it clearly comes out that leaders are very distant, unfamiliar with what's going on. And there is, again, a lack of trust. And that's why employees don't view their leaders as very trustworthy. And therefore, communication can definitely bridge this gap. The other recommendation is that it's not enough to involve employees in everyday issues. You've got to also involve them in big issues, which they can participate and solve together and contribute ideas and take ownership on. So when organizations have done that, they have seen a significant change in how employees perceive their employer. There have been some companies who have been on this journey, so it's important to talk to you about a bit on how they have done this. So on this particular continuum, you would see on one hand, there is no form of employee engagement or no form of employee involvement. Then, of course, there is one-way information, there is joint consultation, and that you will find in factories and union-led entities. And then there is joint decision making, which is a slightly more advanced version and probably what happens in some companies today. And then on the other side of the spectrum is the worker control, where teams are self-managed. Employees decide their own work. They decide how they will engage with each other. And there's a couple of great examples of Zappos and Morningstar who have worked on this model, and some of them call it holocracy. Well, it's a radical way of management. It's not the traditional hierarchy; it's the holocracy approach to management, and it seems to be working in some organizations. It may or may not work in others, but the key message out of this is when you involve employees, there is a greater chance that there is better business outcomes as well. So here are some examples, and I've picked a few which I thought I should share with you. So this is from one of my former employers, and what we created was something like an internal podcast or internal radio. Now the beauty of this is that this was not organization led; it was employee led, and therefore every fortnight employee content was put together as part of a podcast. Of course, the role of the communications team was very crucial to piece this together and use the right channels. But the process of involving employees to generate their own content and therefore share it with employees, so it was for the people, by the people, and that was received far, far more positively than the traditional corporate channels. And of course, when we did something like a customer, evaluation score, and we found NPS of 83, which was fantastic from a number perspective. And then, of course, even arriving at the radio jockey, there was a contest, and it created a lot of buzz and engagement. In another employer of mine, there's this concept of what we created was a platform or a forum where we looked at tapping employees' talent, and there were people with great skills. So some with great at music, some great at emceeing, some great with photography, videography. All we had to do was give them the avenue and the platform to partner with the comms team and be involved in key company events. So again, involving them early enough, giving them the platform to showcase their talent, made them feel involved, made them feel engaged. And of course, it had a ripple effect because everyone else saw that it was adding value to the organization, adding value to them. So it was a win-win for all. Another great example of storytelling. So the traditional way of storytelling, like I said, was where the corporate com team identifies the source, we seek the content, we edit it, we review and publish, and that's a long process, and sometimes it can be quite tedious. But there is a shift we did in one of my companies, Tesco, and what we did was we created a platform where employees could share their little help, and that was the tagline of Tesco, which helped them come up with ways in which they have supported customers, partners, staff, and others. And in that sense, the role of the comms team was more to moderate and curate, and less of going about trying to dig up stories. So when it comes from the ground, comes ground up, it's much more powerful. It's much more accepted. It's much more trustworthy. So that's the outcome we got out of this particular action that we took. Another interesting and very proud of this example, again, at Tesco in India, there was a need. We have a 15-acre beautiful campus, and unfortunately not many people knew about this beautiful campus, and it was also an attraction for hiring when you come to new hire orientation and getting people on board. But because there was no virtual tour of the organization, no one knew how the office looked inside. So it was just a call out to employees to find out who was interested to, put together something which was going to be used by the organization both externally and internally. And a couple of people raised their hands, and what was fascinating was that one had skills in photography, one had skills in 3D animation, and just getting them together to think, brainstorm, and arrive at a virtual tour was brilliant because they did it themselves. It was used by the hiring team, and it got the impact that we needed. And what the comms team, of course, did was we made sure that this interesting project and exercise was widely communicated. So everyone got to know of it. It gave them visibility. It put the spotlight on those team members who contributed. And again, it created a ripple effect because everyone said, wow, if this can be possible by employees outside their work, I'm sure we can also do something similar. And it just created a lot of positive vibes inside the organization. Then I worked in Accenture, and this was an example of an employee becoming a news reader, where we gathered stories, and it was putting employees really in the heart of everyday communication. And when employees see other employees, the chances of them appreciating, believing the content is much higher. And this was, of course, done with the support of the comms team, because we had to create the framework and the setup so that employees could participate and contribute to this. And the last example which I wanted to share is more of a codathon. And again, this is, I think most companies run hackathons. So this is an annual affair at one of my employees, and people come together, they're given a task, they brainstorm, work around the clock, and come up with, they try to solve real world problems. And again, this generates a lot of engagement, makes people feel very positive about cracking, solving problems that which help the customers in the long term. So that was something which made people be more inspired and more engaged. So these are all the examples I wanted to share in terms of what is possible and how does it really, what are the nuts and bolts of employee involvement and employee partnership. So I wanted to then make this into a model which could be summarized and can help each one of you take this back either to your workplace or to your respective organizations in some shape. So there are three parts, of course: the involvement, engagement, and empower. And so when you think about involving, you need to be open enough and to invite their views. So it could be on everything related to the channels that you use, the culture, the content. So having an open mind about that means that the greater chances that you will receive fantastic feedback. And believe me, there's a lot of great ideas that your employees have, and just blocking them out is not really going to help you. The second part, of course, is tapping the enthusiasm, a way of getting them together as natural work teams. You can create a brand council like what we did at my previous workplace. Again, getting people with their different talents to come in, pitch themselves. And you'll be amazed at the amount of talent that you have inside. People with great skills on photography, social media, videography, art, and music, and all of that. There is tons of ways in which you can leverage that talent for making your communication more interesting. And the last is on the involve pillar is there is a responsibility on your part as a communicator or as a HR leader or a business leader, where you should be able to talent spot while going about your work. If you see someone who's really strong in a particular skill, you should be able to mentor, groom, coach them, and get them to contribute in ways that matter. Coming to the engagement pillar, so it is more about decision making. How can you create a platform for shared ownership? How can you encourage employee voice? Rather than having a one-way, make it a two-way affair, and then have champions. Identify champions who are technical experts or non-technical experts who can come in and create fantastic thought leadership content which your organization can leverage. And the last pillar is on empowerment. So crowdsourcing, there are multiple ways of doing it, through contests, through hackathons, through idea generation exercises. Then, of course, there is the storytelling part, where you need to also coach people on how to identify a story, how to make a story, what goes into making a story powerful and impactful. So again, that's very crucial. And the last bit is about entrepreneurship. So you have rather than employees going out and selling their ideas externally, is there a way in which you can harness some of those great ideas internally? Which also means that you may need to invest in improving your staff's personal branding. And there was an interesting article I read about an organization which invested in team members' personal brands, and that in a sense, although it sounds counterintuitive, it made them feel much more empowered and engaged at the workplace, and that made them give back more of their time to the organization rather than leave the organization. So this is really, in a nutshell, how this particular model works. What I wanted to then summarize and make this, to kind of wrap it up, I wanted to call out that there are three key aspects. So one is, of course, the ability to trust employees as equal partners. The traditional way was to see employees as audiences, and that's obviously passé. Um, the the way to involve them in everyday decisions and big decisions is crucial. You need to also demonstrate that you are, really honest and positive about what you're trying to do, and the focus should be on culture and experience so that they see your real intent. And the last is to encourage citizenship behaviors, which means things which they do over and above. The more you do of that, the greater the chances that employees will feel more welcome and more included in the workplace. And in today's world, when we talk a lot about inclusion, I think comms can also play a role in this. I think that's really what I wanted to share. I wanted to thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, I will be more than happy to um, take them. Please feel free to put them on the chat window, and Roxana will be kind enough to pass them on. So I'll wait for a couple of minutes, and you can reach out to me on these channels which are available on, and more than happy to engage and connect offline as well. So please feel free to reach out to me.
I've taken a look at the chat window. We don't have questions,
Okay.
but thank you very much for your knowledge actually with us and for the presentation. It was great, sharp, brief, and very informative. So thank you very much for your time. As mentioned, it is recorded, so you can share that later, and also
Sure.
you can share that with your colleagues as well. And thank you very much for this. And thank you very much, Anissa.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and enjoyed the exercise. Thank you so much.